Hey guys, welcome to my box office addict of the week. That's right, that's our new opening theme. I know what you're thinking. How is he such a genius? How are you so creative and funny every time you make a video? I don't know. Some of us are touched by God. Speaking of being touched by God, Sound of Freedom by Angel Studios. What the hell? This is making me want to become a Christian filmmaker to get in the industry. Screw trying to make a Hollywood superhero movie. I'm making a, you know, action movie. I'm making a Michael Bay Christian film with Jake Gyllenhaal and Chris Pratt. I'm all in. $85 million. There are people on box office forums going crazy with this movie's success. I've seen so much, this whole thing's propaganda. It's bullshit. It's QAnon conspiracy crap. And they're also mad about the box office. They keep saying that the church bought all of the tickets and inflated the numbers, which I can believe partially. That totally makes sense. But the fact it's at 85 million and in this weekend it's at 27 million, this is going to be the first religious film that's produced. And by the way, this film got good reviews. That's another thing I think a lot of people are ignoring. This film had decent reviews. But this makes me think, like, damn, can Daily Wire break into the market? And make a big hit. So I believe this film cost $14 million and it's going to make over $100 million. That's just insane. I can't even process it. We're here to talk about Mission Impossible, but Sound of Freedom really doesn't need to be slept on for counter pathways in Hollywood to make successful movies that aren't $300 million blockbusters. Maybe they'll be like Angel Studios can become the Blumhouse of Christian movies. Or, I don't. Jim Caviezel being in it, Jesus killing child traffickers. That's so funny. I'm all for it. Joyride continues to be a disaster. I recently heard Evan Goldberg on a podcast talking about this movie and why they made it, and I'm like, oh, you made every wrong choice. Why you should produce a movie? No wonder this is going to bomb. I'm him and Rogan. No Hard Feelings, starring J-Law, is at 77 million. It's honestly doing okay, but the budget was 45 million because I'm assuming she probably got 20 million or so. Transformers Rise of the Beast is at 420 million. Not great. Spider-Man Across the Universe continues to be the biggest hit of the summer, at least domestically, besides, I guess Mario wasn't a summer film, but 368 million. That's great. The foreign numbers are lacking. It really doesn't seem like this movie can make much more there, at least 300 million. But I think $680 million is definitely in play here for this movie, which is great. Elemental. Honestly, Elemental, we have to acknowledge this. The movie's held very well. Unfortunately, they spent $200 million on it, and that's what kicked them in the ass. But the fact the opening weekend was so terrible, and we all thought, a lot of us, that maybe this one would hold well enough to make even 100 million. I got to give them credit here if we look at the weekend breakdowns for this film. Like 37%, 34%, 17, 13. It's been able to scratch its way to $125 million and 311 million worldwide. So if the budget of this film had been $80, $90 million, they could have made a profit off of this movie. Sort of like the Sing movies. I think the last Sing movie made 300 million, but it cost like 80. So that's the thing I'd say to Disney. This is actually the only positive sign here. This movie could have made money had they not spent so much on it. Because the word of mouth isn't terrible. It is holding decently, which means families are going to see this movie. Whether how I feel about it or not, or you feel about it or not. Even though this film's a bomb, I do think there is something that Disney could take here for a productive direction, that maybe they could make animated films that make money again. Just get the budget down. Indiana Jones is still a disaster. 302 million. The budget's 300 million. There's nothing positive to say here about this. I mean, it's just embarrassing. I've made enough videos on the Indiana Jones thing. I don't really have anything new to say about it. It's just a bomb. They're going to lose a couple $100 million on this movie. And it's just going to be really embarrassing, and you just feel bad for everyone involved. James Mangold, Harrison Ford, it's just unfortunate. $13 million for Insidious: The Red Door. It's at $122 million worldwide. This movie's probably already made a profit. Looks like it'll end up somewhere around $70, $75 million. and probably 150 million worldwide. So kudos to them. Sound of Freedom we discussed. Let's get to Mission Impossible. This is weird. I don't even know how to approach this. This is very concerning, at least domestically. Maybe not concerning, but that we, as box office analysts, overestimated this film for a long time. So the assumption was is that this film was just going to open huge, that it was going to open, uh, not quite Top Gun Maverick, but it was going to open over 100 million because of Top Gun Maverick, because Tom Cruise was so huge. Everybody was hyped. The last Mission Impossible Fallout was the best reviewed, and was the highest grossing film of the franchise, unadjusted for inflation. I believe adjusted for inflation, the second film is the biggest one that came out. I believe with inflation, that film probably made like over $800 million, if not more. The first film, too, made 480 million in 96. But the thing to look at here, I mean, this isn't a bad opening for this franchise. The Mission Impossible franchise, the recent ones, haven't ever really had a big opening weekend. They've all opened pretty modestly well and then had good word of mouth. But they make most of their money from the international box office. They've also had pretty conservative budgets compared to a lot of other blockbuster franchises. But I will say there is some coping going on. This is a disappointing opening. It's not a bad opening. It doesn't mean the movie's a failure because it still made 235 million worldwide. So it should still be able to make 750 million dollars worldwide, if not more, if the word of mouth is good. This is dependent on how Barbie and Oppenheimer affect its box office because those movies will be taking the more expensive screens from this film. So it doesn't have a lot of time to play before that happens. Oppenheimer in particular is going to be taking a lot of its IMAX screenings and so on. But the 56 million over the 3 day, because they keep hyping up this is the best 5 day that the franchise has had, right? It's not the best 3 day, but it's the best 5 day. But still, this was estimated to go in and do 87 million to 90 million, and people were saying over 100 million. The fact that it came down on the lower end, that it opened 80 million over its 5 day opening. Now, don't be wrong, if this is open over the 3 day weekend, it would have had the highest opening weekend of the franchise. But it would have probably been like, let's say like 65 million. And that is low. That is low for this movie with its hype and expectation. This has a $290 million budget, which was because of COVID shutdowns. But still, you have to factor that in. And I don't know if they're going to make a big profit off of this movie. I'm sure Top Gun Maverick covered all of the costs that Tom Cruise had with this movie as a producer and so on. And they have Dead Reckoning Part 2 coming out, which originally they were supposed to be filmed at the same time and they didn't do, which I'm thinking they probably wish they had done now. But on Deadline, they keep trying to say, well, this isn't like Indiana Jones in that. This isn't a bomb like that because of the international numbers, and it's a good review. It's a well-reviewed movie. It's got 96% on Rotten Tomatoes and 81 on Metacritic. It's the second best reviewed film after Fallout in the franchise. That's all true, but I'm still worried about this film's performance. Because with a $290 million budget, $100 million marketing campaign, I don't know if this is going to have a big profit margin for them at the end of the day. But here's the weird thing. This has happened to this franchise before. People don't discuss this. Mission Impossible 3 was pretty much a bomb, and the franchise seemed dead. So when you think about the Fast and Furious and these other franchises, Mission Impossible always kind of ebbed and flowed. I also think it's just been too long in releases. I think granted, Mission Impossible 2 to 3 was 6 years, but that movie also didn't do that well, and then we had to wait a few years, and then they kind of rebooted the franchise with Ghost Protocol. But between that and Rogue Nation, those were only 4 years. And then Fallout came out 3 years after Rogue Nation. But this film being a 5 year break, and the Top Gun sequel happening, which we waited 30 years for, I do think it did kill some of the momentum of this franchise where it was at in 2018. I also think the marketing for this film was fairly poor. But let's break this down, right? So the original Mission Impossible was a huge hit. 1996 was the peak year of Tom Cruise's career. This and Jerry Maguire came out, and both were huge hits and loved movies and solidified him in two ways. As a rom-com leading man, serious actor, which he had already been established at, but he found a universality in Jerry Maguire, and then as an action star, which is where his career has gone more as time has gone on, is the Ethan Hunt type roles. This movie opened at 45 million and made 457 million dollars on an 80 million dollar budget in 96, and it was the first time I think he produced something early on. Then we get Mission Impossible 2, the black sheep of the franchise by John Woo. That made $546 million on a budget of $125 million. Huge hit. This was when Tom Cruise was like easily the biggest movie star in the world. Mission Impossible 3 is the weird Scientology run. This movie cost $150 million. It only made $134 million domestic, $398 million worldwide. J.J. Abrams' first movie. Philip Seymour Hoffman. I'm going to find her. I'm going to hurt her. Great villain. But I don't think they broke even on this movie, or they barely did, but I believe this lost them money. So for years it was like Tom Cruise is done. Then we got Ghost Protocol, which made $694 million on a $145 million budget. Brad Bird comes in, great reviews. The franchise seems like it's back. Then Cruise can't get the next film funded, has to go to China to get money to make it. Rogue Nation brings in Christopher McQuarrie. Makes a little bit less than Ghost Protocol, $682 million, but it has a budget of $150 million. $55 million opening, ends up being a very successful movie. Now Cruise and McQuarrie are a team, and we start, this leads to the Top Gun Maverick thing. This is kind of where it starts to begin, is around this time. Then we get Mission Impossible Fallout in 2018. $178 million budget. Once again, that's a very good budget for a big franchise film. Makes $791 million worldwide. Very successful film. Incredibly well reviewed. 86 on Metacritic, 97% on Rotten Tomatoes. Considered one of the best action films of that decade. And now here we are with Dead Reckoning Part 1. And the $56 million opening is the same weekend numbers as Rogue Nation. The 5-day. I mean, I do think this film could make $200 million domestically. I think that's definitely in play. I do think it could make $750 million worldwide. But a lot of people did think this was going to make $1 billion or open better. So I just have to put it down to a few things. I think they waited too long in between films, and it's not their fault. It was totally because of COVID. This film was meant to come out before this date. I think that the franchise has reached a fatigue point. I think this franchise, this is the 7th film in a franchise. That's a lot, if we're being honest. I think the runtime maybe affected it. And I also just think the marketing wasn't great. I don't think the trailers were as good as they were for Ghost Protocol and Rogue Nation and Fallout. I don't think they really built hype in the same way. And I do think that Top Gun may have even overshadowed a little more. You almost argue that Maverick could be more iconic, obviously, than Ethan Hunt at this point. But this movie is very well reviewed. In general, I hear people are really liking it. I do think it is going to make a profit, but it is a disappointment, and it is slightly scary because, Little Mermaid bombing and Indiana Jones bombing and The Flash bombing, the blame on a lot of those movies were they were bad movies, they were poorly produced, they had issues with production, the fan base didn't support it. I get all of that. But when something like this movie underperforms and doesn't make the money that it was really expected to do, it is a sign. It's getting a little worrisome now. Besides Barbenheimer, which we're so close to, I can't even handle it. I feel it in my testicles. I'm too electrified about Barbenheimer. I'm not sure if I'm ready for it. I don't know if I'm worthy of it. It could be the greatest box office addict of all time. It's very possible. Who knew that Gerwig and Nolan would be the Alpha and Omega? But it just feels like Mission Impossible, they really didn't build hype for this movie as it got closer to release. I also think the release date, the Barbie Oppenheimer thing, this backfired bad. Ghost Protocol was a holiday release. I definitely think this film should have come out in the fall, after summer, and I think it would have done a lot better. So it's just kind of upsetting because I wanted this film to make $1 billion. I support Mission Impossible. I love the Mission Impossible franchise. I think it's the best dad franchise out there. I like Christopher McQuarrie. I wanted this film to do a lot better. So it's just a weird sign. Maybe it's not just certain movies, but all movies are being impacted this summer, except for things like Sound of Freedom. But even that movie's really a big hit because of its budget. It's a real struggle. Outside of Spider-Man, none of these movies have made $300 million domestically. they've all struggled to get there. I mean, Mario obviously was a breakout, but so many of the films this year, like even Little Mermaid, it's at 293 million. Like, it just can't get there. Um, it really is a sign of there is a limit to how much an audience will go see certain movies. And the real thing that has to change is, yeah, movies are going to have to start costing $100 million to $150 million again, and they can no longer be putting like $250 million into movies. Obviously, Mission Impossible COVID, Cruise does keep his budgets well. At a good side, Top Gun Maverick cost 170 million. I believe this film probably was meant to cost $200 million, and then COVID added $90 million to it in costs. So that does have to be factored in. But still, for the seventh film in a franchise, um, this isn't the worst thing in the world. I mean, how many, it's very rare to have a franchise that's been going on now for we're coming up on 30 years, right? Yeah, 30 years here soon that this franchise has been around. So let's look at Fast X real quick to kind of wrap up. See, that opened at 67 million over the 3 day and has made 700 million worldwide. So I do think that's an interesting comp to Mission Impossible. I think it'll do better than this film, but I think this is a good comparison. I think the foreign number is pretty accurate. I think Mission Impossible will probably make more than this. Let's say like 185 million or so on. So I think over 700 million is pretty much guaranteed for the film, but it definitely is not doing as well as a lot of people thought it was going to do. I mean, a lot of people thought it was going to be the dominant movie of the summer and easily be the highest grossing film of the summer, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen. I don't know if it can outgross Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I don't think it can. But still, kudos to Tom Cruise to keep this franchise going this long. The movie's getting good reviews. It's still a franchise that people love. I'm sure they're going to make their money back. I'm sure this will do well on streaming and so on. And hopefully with Dead Reckoning Part 2, they can build some more hype up for it being the last film, and that film can do a little bit better. But tell me what you think in the comments. Why did the opening of this film fall below expectations? How do you think the film will end up? Do you think the Barbie Oppenheimer thing will affect it? Because you might think it won't, but you got to understand those screens where you can charge $30 for a ticket are very important nowadays for these movies making that extra money. And there just isn't a thing now where it seems like all the movies get seen. It used to be people would go see 3 or 4 movies. And it feels like Barbie and Oppenheimer is going to take a lot of momentum away from this film as it goes. So I'm pretty worried more about the second weekend of this film than the opening weekend. This opening is fine, but if it drops pretty steep next week or the week after, there is cause for concern. But please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you guys think. Give me your Barbie and Oppenheimer opening weekend predictions. Let's go into it. I'm hella excited. Maybe I'll do a live stream special to celebrate that one. And I just want you guys to know that I love you and I care about you. And I hope someday we can all meet up together at a Chuck E. Cheese and have a great time playing skee ball and eating some terrible, shitty pizza.